On my 18th birthday, my stepfather threw a trash bag of my clothes onto the driveway and locked the door. I was entirely penniless and utterly alone, but a rusted key to my late mother's abandoned estate was about to unlock a multi-million-dollar secret that would destroy him forever. The rain was coming down in sheets the morning I turned 18. I remember the exact sound it made against the floor-to-ceiling windows of our sweeping Connecticut estate, a persistent, drumming rhythm that felt more like a countdown than a weather pattern. I had woken up with a hollow ache in my chest, just as I had every morning for the past 14 months since my mother, Beatrice Gallagher, passed away from an aggressive form of pancreatic cancer. I walked downstairs, hoping for at least a quiet acknowledgement of my birthday. Instead, I found my stepfather, Preston Harrington, standing in the grand foyer. He was dressed in his custom Italian suit, adjusting his Rolex with a look of terrifying calm. At his feet sat a single, heavy-duty black trash bag. "Happy birthday, Chloe," he said, his voice as smooth and cold as the marble floor beneath us. Before I could even muster a response, he handed me a manila folder. "You are legally an adult today. As per the stipulations of the estate and your mother's finalized will, my financial obligations to you have officially terminated." I stared at him, my mind short-circuiting. "Preston, what are you talking about? Mom left half the estate in a trust for my college tuition." He offered a thin, patronizing smile. "Your mother was a beautiful woman, Chloe, but she was terrible with legal phrasing. She left everything to me, with the understanding times that I would provide for you until adulthood. You are now an adult. The house, the accounts, the cars, they are solely in my name. And frankly, I am tired of looking at you. You remind me too much of the past." He nudged the trash bag with the toe of his polished Oxford shoe. "I packed the essentials. The rest of your room is being cleared out by a staging company this afternoon. I'm renovating." "You can't do this!" I screamed, the shock finally giving way to a raw, burning panic. "This is my home! My mother bought this house before she even met you!" "Security will be here in 2 minutes," Preston replied, turning his back to me and walking toward his home office. "If you aren't off the property by the time they arrive, you'll be trespassing." And just like that, the heavy oak doors slammed shut behind me. I was standing in the freezing rain on my 18th birthday, clutching a trash bag full of damp sweaters and jeans. I had no money, no car, and nowhere to go. Preston had systematically isolated my mother and me from our extended family over the 5 years they were married. I was entirely alone. I walked 3 miles to a gas station and used a borrowed phone to call my best friend, Hannah Jenkins. Hannah and her family took me in, letting me sleep on a lumpy futon in their cramped apartment. For the next 2 months, my life was a blur of exhaustion. I took a grueling job working the graveyard shift at a 24-hour diner, scrubbing grease off griddles and serving burnt coffee to truckers just to save up for community college. Every night, my feet throbbed, and my heart burned with a toxic mix of grief and hatred for Preston Harrington. He had stolen my mother's legacy and erased me from my own life. Then, on a dreary Tuesday in November, a thick envelope arrived at Hannah's apartment. It was sent via certified mail, addressed to me. The return address belonged to a law firm in Manhattan, Abernathy and Croft, attorneys at law. My hands trembled as I tore it open. Inside was a heavy, antique brass key and a typed letter on thick, cream-colored stationery. It was signed by a retired attorney named Winston Abernathy. "Is greater than, dear Chloe, is greater than. If you are reading this, you have turned 18, and I have fulfilled my final promise to your mother, Beatrice. Before her illness took hold, your mother suspected that Preston's intentions were not pure. She legally separated one single asset from her primary estate, an asset Preston knows nothing about, held in a blind trust under my supervision. Is greater than, enclosed, is the key to her childhood home at 42 Ashcroft Drive in the Hudson Valley. The property has been abandoned for over 2 decades, but the taxes are paid in perpetuity. Your mother asked me to tell you one thing. Look behind the poetry. Is greater than. The rest is up to you. I wish you the very best of luck." I read the letter 4 times. An abandoned house? A blind trust? My mother had known. Even as she was dying, she knew Preston was a snake, and she had planted a seed for me to find when the time was right. I didn't go to my shift at the diner that night. Instead, I packed a backpack, borrowed a flashlight and a crowbar from Hannah's dad, and bought a one-way bus ticket to the Hudson Valley. I didn't know what I was looking for, but I knew I was about to find the real legacy my mother had left behind. The bus dropped me off in a sleepy, fog-draped town in upstate New York. From there, I hiked 2 miles down winding, leaf-strewn back roads until I found it. 42 Ashcroft Drive. The property was hidden behind a massive, rusted wrought iron gate entirely swallowed by aggressive ivy. I pushed the heavy gate, wincing as it groaned on its ancient hinges. As I walked up the cracked gravel driveway, the house came into view. It was a sprawling 3-story Victorian mansion, its slate roof sagging in places, windows boarded up like blinded eyes, paint peeled from the wooden siding in long grayish strips. It looked like a mausoleum, a relic of a forgotten era, perfectly preserved in decay. I climbed the rotting steps of the wraparound porch, my heart hammering against my ribs. I slid the heavy brass key into the front door's tarnished lock. It stuck for a moment, resisting, before giving way with a loud, satisfying times click. I pushed the door open. The air inside was freezing, smelling of dust, damp wood, and old paper. I flicked on my flashlight, the bright beam cutting through the gloom. The interior was breathtakingly eerie. Furniture was draped in white sheets like ghosts waiting in the parlor. A grand staircase swept up to the second floor, blanketed in a thick layer of untouched dust. Look behind the poetry. The cryptic phrase from Winston Abernathy's letter echoed in my mind. If my mother had hidden something behind poetry, there was only one logical place to start: the library. I moved cautiously through the silent house, the floorboards groaning under my boots. I found the library at the end of the main hallway. It was a magnificent, octagonal room with floor-to-ceiling mahogany bookshelves that were still packed with thousands of decaying, leather-bound volumes. The air here was thicker, heavy with the scent of decaying binding glue. I spent the next 3 hours methodically tearing the room apart. I pulled down books, shook them out, and checked behind them. I scoured the poetry section, pulling out volumes of Walt Whitman, Sylvia Plath, and Robert Frost. Nothing. My hands were black with grime, my lungs irritated by the swirling dust. Frustration began to mount. Had I misunderstood? Was it a metaphorical riddle? I slumped into a decaying leather armchair, shining my flashlight around the room. That's when my beam caught a framed portrait hanging on the far wall, situated between 2 massive bookshelves. It was a beautiful, slightly water-damaged painting of a woman holding a book. I stood up and walked closer, wiping a layer of grime off the brass plaque mounted beneath the frame. It read, Emily Dickinson, 1890. My breath caught in my throat. The poetry. I reached out and grabbed the sides of the heavy gilded frame. It was bolted securely to the wall, but when I pulled slightly to the left, I felt a mechanical give. I pulled harder, and the entire painting swung open on hidden, well-oiled hinges, revealing a dark recess in the mahogany paneling. Nestled securely inside the wall was a heavy, industrial-grade Diebold combination safe. It was made of thick, brushed steel, looking completely out of place in the Victorian home. My pulse roared in my ears. I reached into the recess and touched the cold metal dial. It was a standard rotary lock. I needed a combination. Panic threatened to choke me. Winston's letter hadn't contained any numbers. I had no idea what the code could be. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to think like my mother. Beatrice was deeply sentimental. She held on to dates and memories like they were precious stones. I tried her birthday, the 22nd of April, 2068. I turned the dial. Click, click, click. Pull. Nothing. The handle wouldn't budge. I tried my birthday, the 14th of September, 2008. Click, 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 pull. Still locked solid. I wiped sweat from my forehead, my mind racing. What date was so important, so secretive, that she would use it to guard her most precious hidden asset? And then, a memory surfaced. A week before she died, the pain medication had left her delirious. She had gripped my hand tightly, her eyes wide, and whispered, "The day everything changed, Chloe. The day we were saved. Keep it safe." I hadn't understood her at the time, but I remembered the exact date she had always celebrated as our fresh start before Preston entered the picture. It was the day her abusive first husband, my biological father, whom I never knew had legally signed away his parental rights, allowing us to flee across the country. The 17th of August, 2011. My hands shook as I reached for the dial. 08. I spun it past 0 to the right. 17. I spun it back to the left. 11. I turned it right, one last time. I grasped the heavy steel handle and pulled. A loud, heavy metallic thud times, resonated from within the door. The locking mechanisms retracted, and the heavy safe door swung open. I aimed my flashlight inside, entirely unprepared for what I was about to find. It wasn't just cash, though there were thick, rubber-banded stacks of $100 bills lining the bottom shelf. Above the money sat several thick ledgers, a hard drive, and a red accordion folder stamped with the word Times Confidential. I pulled the red folder out first, untying the string closure. Inside was a perfectly preserved, notarized document. I read the header, Last Will and Testament of Beatrice Gallagher. The date on the notary stamp was just 3 weeks before her death. Months, times, after times. The forged will Preston had used to steal the estate and kick me out, but it was the ledger that made my blood run cold. I opened the heavy black book. It was filled with my mother's elegant handwriting, detailing offshore bank accounts, wire transfers, and dummy corporations. Beside each entry were dates, routing numbers, and exact dollar amounts. At the very top of the first page, my mother had written a note for Chloe. Preston has been embezzling from his clients for 6 years. He has hidden over $40 million. This ledger is the proof. Take everything back, my beautiful girl. I stood in the freezing, dust-filled library, clutching the ledger to my chest. Preston Harrington hadn't just stolen my home. He was a massive, white-collar criminal. And I now held the smoking gun that could send him to federal prison for the rest of his life. I looked at the stacks of cash. I looked at the true will. My days of scrubbing diner griddles and sleeping on Hannah's futon were over. I smiled, the cold air biting at my cheeks. It was time to go home. It was time to destroy Preston Harrington. I left the Hudson Valley mansion just as the sun was beginning to break through the thick morning fog. My backpack was now heavily weighted with $200,000 in banded cash, the encrypted hard drive, the true will, and the damning black ledger. Every step I took back down that overgrown driveway felt different. I was no longer the terrified, penniless teenager shivering on the curb. I was the architect of Preston Harrington's impending destruction. My first stop was Manhattan. I used a small stack of the $100 bills to buy a burner phone, a clean set of clothes, and a train ticket to Grand Central Station. By noon, I was standing in the opulent, mahogany-paneled lobby of Times Abernathy and Croft. When I finally sat across from Winston Abernathy, a sharp-eyed, silver-haired attorney who looked both exhausted and fiercely intelligent, I dumped the contents of my backpack onto his pristine glass desk. "You found it," Winston breathed, picking up the red accordion folder with trembling hands. "Your mother told me there was a fail-safe, but I had no idea she had compiled all of this. Beatrice was always brilliant, but this is a tactical nuke. I want him ruined, Winston," I said, my voice steady and cold. "I don't just want my house back. I want him to lose his freedom, his reputation, and every single cent he stole. Can we do that?" Winston adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses and opened the ledger. As his eyes scanned the pages, a predatory smile spread across his face. "Chloe, my dear, we aren't just going to ruin him. We are going to obliterate him." For the next 3 days, Winston's office transformed into a war room. We brought in a trusted digital forensics expert, a man named Jasper, to crack the encrypted hard drive my mother had hidden. What we found on that drive made the ledger look like child's play. Preston Harrington wasn't just a greedy opportunist. He was running a highly sophisticated, multi-million-dollar Ponzi scheme. He had been targeting vulnerable, high-net-worth widows' women exactly like my mother. Here is exactly what Preston had been doing. The shell game. He established 3 dummy corporations in the Cayman Islands under the name Times Apex Holdings. Asset bleeding. He would take over the financial portfolios of grieving widows, promising aggressive growth, but instead, He wired their principal investments directly into his offshore accounts. The cover-up. He used the stolen funds to pay off early investors, printing falsified quarterly statements to make it look like their portfolios were thriving. The estate fraud. When my mother became terminally ill, he forged her signature on a revised will, bribed a corrupt notary to stamp it, and expedited the probate process to seize our Connecticut estate before his liquidity dried up. He's actually completely broke on paper, Jasper explained, tapping his computer screen. He's been bleeding cash for months to keep the SEC off his back. That's why he kicked you out and brought in a staging company on your birthday. He's trying to quietly liquidate your mother's estate to a commercial developer to cover a $10 million shortfall in his fund. My blood boiled. He was going to bulldoze my childhood home to hide his crimes. Winston picked up his desk phone. It's time to bring in the heavy artillery. I have a contact at the FBI's white-collar crime division in New York, Special Agent Nathan Cole. He's been trying to build a case against Preston for 2 years but could never find the paper trail. Agent Cole arrived at the office less than an hour later. He was a tall, no-nonsense federal agent who took one look at the ledger and the hard drive data and immediately began making phone calls. "This is the smoking gun, Chloe," Agent Cole said, shaking my hand. "We have enough to secure federal arrest warrants for wire fraud, embezzlement, and money laundering. But taking him down quietly in his office isn't going to send the message we need to send to his co-conspirators." "He's hosting the annual Harrington Wealth Management Winter Gala this Saturday," I said, a plan rapidly forming in my mind. "It's at my house in Connecticut. The governor will be there. The local press will be there. All of his top clients and investors." Agent Cole looked at Winston, a smirk playing on his lips. "A public sting operation. High visibility. It prevents him from spinning a narrative to his investors before the assets are frozen." "I want to be the one to do it," I insisted, looking Agent Cole dead in the eye. "He threw me out like garbage in front of that house. I want to be standing right in front of him when you put the cuffs on." Agent Cole nodded slowly. "Saturday night it is. Let's give Mr. Harrington a gala he will never forget." I spent the next 2 days preparing. I used the cash from the safe to check into a luxury hotel and completely transform myself. I bought a stunning, custom-tailored emerald green evening gown, had my hair professionally styled, and hired a private chauffeur. I invited Hannah, my best friend who had taken me in when I was homeless, to be my +1. We were going to walk into the lion's den looking like royalty. Saturday evening arrived crisp and freezing, the Connecticut air biting at my bare shoulders as my rented black town car pulled up to the sweeping driveway of my childhood home. The estate was unrecognizable. Preston had erected massive, heated white tents on the manicured lawns. A string quartet played Vivaldi near the grand staircase. Waiters in crisp white tuxedos circulated with trays of champagne and caviar. The driveway was packed with Bentleys, Porsches, and Maybachs. Preston was putting on a sickening display of extreme wealth that belonged to me and the dozens of women he had defrauded. Hannah squeezed my hand in the back seat. "You ready for this?" "I've never been more ready for anything in my life," I replied. I stepped out of the car, the emerald silk of my dress sweeping the pavement. I walked past the security detail at the front door. Because I wasn't on the guest list, a burly guard stepped in my path. Before he could speak, Agent Cole, dressed seamlessly in a tuxedo, flashed a golden badge hidden inside his jacket. The guard immediately backed away, his face paling. I pushed open the heavy oak doors and stepped into the grand foyer, the exact spot where Preston had handed me a trash bag just months prior. The main ballroom was packed with the state's elite, and there, standing on a slightly elevated dais at the front of the room, was Preston Harrington. He was holding a microphone, a crystal flute of champagne in his hand, delivering a smug, self-congratulatory speech about integrity, legacy, and securing the future. I didn't wait for him to finish. I walked straight down the center aisle of the ballroom, my heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. The crowd naturally parted, murmurs rippling through the wealthy guests as they noticed me. Preston stopped mid-sentence. His eyes locked onto mine, and for a split second, the polished, arrogant facade slipped. I saw genuine, unadulterated shock. "Chloe," he said into the microphone, his voice echoing awkwardly through the silent room. He quickly recovered, forcing a tight, condescending smile. "Ladies and gentlemen, it seems my stepdaughter has decided to crash the party. Security, please escort this young woman off the premises. She is trespassing." Two security guards started moving toward me, but Winston Abernathy stepped out from the crowd, holding a thick stack of legal documents. "She is not trespassing, Preston," Winston's voice boomed, projecting across the silent ballroom. "In fact, you are standing in her house." Preston's face flushed deep red. "Winston, what is the meaning of this? Get them out of here." I walked up to the edge of the dais, looking up at the man who had tormented my mother and tried to erase my existence. "You thought you were so smart, Preston. You thought because my mother was dying she was blind, but she knew exactly what you were doing." I pulled a certified copy of the true will from my clutch and tossed it onto the stage at his feet. "That is my mother's real, finalized will, executed 3 weeks before she died," I said, my voice ringing out clear and steady. "It leaves this estate, all of its assets, and the entire Gallagher fortune solely to me in a blind trust. The will you used in probate was a forgery. You don't own this house. You don't own anything." The crowd erupted into shocked whispers. A few of the prominent investors in the front row exchanged panicked glances. "You're insane," Preston spat, his composure finally shattering. He pointed a trembling finger at me. "That is a fake. I have the legal deed to this property. You are a delusional, ungrateful brat who couldn't handle being cut off." "No, Preston," a deep, commanding voice interrupted. Agent Cole walked out from behind the ice sculpture near the entrance, flanked by 6 heavily armed federal agents wearing tactical FBI windbreakers over their suits. The string quartet abruptly stopped playing. Several guests gasped, and someone dropped a champagne glass, the crystal shattering loudly on the floor. "Preston Harrington," Agent Cole announced, pulling out a pair of steel handcuffs. "You are under arrest for 15 counts of wire fraud, grand larceny, forgery, and violating the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act." Preston staggered backward, knocking over his microphone stand. It let out a piercing screech of feedback. "This is a misunderstanding. I manage billions of dollars. You can't do this." "We have the Apex Holdings ledgers, Preston," I said quietly, though the silence in the room made my words carry. "We have the hard drive. We know about the Cayman accounts, the forged quarterly statements, and the money you stole from the Tri-State Teachers Union pension fund to cover your losses. It's over." The color completely drained from his face. He looked like a ghost. The arrogant, untouchable titan of finance had vanished, replaced by a terrified, pathetic criminal realizing his life was entirely over. Agent Cole marched up the steps of the dais, spun Preston around roughly, and slapped the handcuffs onto his wrists. The click times of the metal locking into place was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. "You have the right to remain silent," Agent Cole recited as he frog-marched Preston off the stage. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." As the FBI dragged him down the center aisle, Preston locked eyes with me one last time. There was no anger left in his gaze, only the hollow, devastating realization of utter defeat. I didn't look away. I watched him being shoved into the back of a federal SUV through the massive front windows of my home. The aftermath was swift and merciless. Within 48 hours, the SEC froze all of Preston's corporate and personal accounts. The true will was authenticated by Judge Eleanor Davies in probate court, and the forged document was officially voided. Preston's assets were liquidated to pay back the widows and pension funds he had defrauded. 7 months later, Preston Harrington stood in a federal courtroom. Without his stolen millions to afford high-priced defense attorneys, he was appointed a public defender. He pleaded guilty to avoid a drawn-out trial and was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole. As for me, I finally moved back into the Connecticut estate. The house felt warm again, no longer tainted by his presence. I used a portion of the recovered cash from the wall safe to set up a college scholarship fund in my mother's name, dedicated to helping young women who had survived financial abuse. I paid for Hannah's college tuition in full, a small token of gratitude for the girl who had given me a place to sleep when the world had thrown me away. I was no longer the broken 18-year-old girl standing in the rain with a trash bag. I was Chloe Gallagher. I had fought for my mother's legacy, unraveled a multi-million-dollar criminal empire, and reclaimed my life. And I had done it all by looking behind the poetry. What an absolutely satisfying ending. Chloe went from rock bottom to completely dismantling a multi-million-dollar criminal empire, ensuring Preston got exactly the karma he deserved. It proves that a mother's love, and a brilliant backup plan can conquer even the darkest betrayals. Did you love seeing Preston get arrested in front of all his wealthy friends? Drop your favorite moment in the comments. Don't forget to like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel for more crazy real-life dramas.